Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with columnist at the article Ali Miraj and journalist and author Christina Patterson. Evening to you both. Let's take a look now at what's on some of those front pages. The Sunday Telegraph claims that Boris Johnson has been warned the migrant crisis could destroy the Conservative Party, as a poll for the paper shows the majority of Tory voters believe the government's approach to channel crossings is too soft. The Health Secretary has ordered a review into racial bias in medical equipment, reports the Sunday Times, because of fears thousands of ethnic minority patients who died of COVID should have survived. Senior Conservatives say the party is risking a rebellion if Boris Johnson doesn't ditch plans that would see many of England's poorest pensioners paying more for their social care. That's according to The Observer. The Sunday Mirror also leads with the Prime Minister featuring a picture of him without a face mask on a northern train. And loyal Redwall Tory MPs are still backing winner Boris Johnson to lead them into the next election, says the Sunday Express. And we're joined tonight by Ali Miraj and Christina Patterson. Evening to you both. Great to see you. So, Ali, let's start with you and the front of the Sunday Telegraph. Boris Johnson under increasing pressure over the migrant crisis.
Well, this is a story, Sarah, that's been rumbling on for some time now. There have been 24,500 migrants that have crossed the Channel so far this year, and they're averaging about 1,000 a day now. So this is a really serious problem. It has been a headache for the Home Secretary for some time now. But unfortunately, despite various measures being taken, we're failing to get a grip of it. She's looked at potentially sending migrants to Ascension Island. That was dropped. Hiring special equipment to make bigger waves to try and push them back towards France. That was dropped. She's got 54 million that she's giving to the French state to try and help with these border controls, to increase drone patrols and surveillance, but it's still not having enough of an impact. And this is now, as is the story saying there, that 77% of Tory voters are really feeling that this is hampering the popularity of the government. And donors, certain Tory donors are now coming out saying that the Prime Minister needs to get really tough on this, or it could destabilise the prospects of a Tory victory at the next election. So it's a serious problem. The Prime Minister's drafted in Steve Barclay, the Cabinet Office Minister, to help Priti Patel with this, to underline the severity of the issue. But it's difficult to see exactly what could happen. There was some talk of asylum seekers being processed in Albania earlier this week, which the Albanian government immediately sort of put into the long grass. So not really sure what's going to happen there. I think there have been talks with about 6 other countries as well, but nothing has actually been agreed so far. So a real issue for the government, and one that's costing it popularity right now.
Yeah, I mean, Home Secretary after Home Secretary has grappled with this issue. We've had a lot of tough talk from Priti Patel, as Ali has just set out there, Christina. But what is the PM going to do now under pressure, and is it going to make any difference?
I imagine he's going to promise to send them to Mars to be processed, because I think that's the kind of promise he makes, and that's probably about as much as you can trust any of his promises. I mean, this is a kind of absolutely typical of this government, that they think everything is easy. They promise that they will solve this problem and that problem. I mean, we went through a whole national disaster, essentially Brexit, a complete act of self-sabotage and economic self-harm under the delusion that it would enable us to have control over our own borders. And what this shows is that, there is literally nobody except us stopping us from controlling our borders now. And we can't do it because we are much better, or our government is much better at coming up with empty slogans than at enacting any kind of policy. Of course, this is a complex issue. There are things that could be done. It's interesting that the Tory voters are saying that the government is too soft. Actually, what it is incompetent. It's been in power for 11 years, and what it ends up with is just a mess. Most asylum claims are not sorted out for years.
And Priti Patel's been in Washington this week. She's been speaking. She's been pointing the finger at Schengen, at the open borders policy in Europe as being to blame for this. But there is a lot of pressure, Ali, isn't there, coming from within the Tory party and from outside. A prominent party donor quoted in The Telegraph, but also cabinet ministers saying the government is shot and bereft of ideas and like a dead man walking, according to The Telegraph.
Well, look, I think what people want within the Tory party is a bit like, as one Tory backbencher told me, Boris got Brexit done. We want him to get votes done, and that's what they want. The reality is that it's very difficult to do, and I think the Home Secretary needs to be careful. I mean, talking about Schengen, which is an operation, a protocol that's been in place since 1995, it's a bit odd to be blaming Schengen for this issue right now. Look, it is a serious issue, and you've now got increased migrants now on the border at Poland as well, which is a crisis being confected by the Belarusian state. So there are problems, but this comes at a time, Sarah, where the government has had really a lot of self-inflicted problems. The most notable one being the whole handling of the Owen Patterson outside interests row, which then mushroomed on for 2 weeks into a much broader issue around second jobs for MPs, totally self-inflicted, where the Prime Minister this week did show contrition, rightly so, in front of the 1922 Committee of Conservative backbenchers. But a lot of people shaking their heads within the party thinking, well, why did that have to happen? A serious issue. Then there was also disappointment around the HS2, the fact that the Eastern Line has been scrapped, the fact that the Trans-Pennine route between Leeds and Manchester will not go ahead. So some backbenchers, particularly from the 29 intake in the Red Wall, feeling hard done by, feeling that levelling up is not what it actually is all made out to be, and over-promising and under-delivering. So I think the Prime Minister's got some problems on various flanks, and this is a very visible headache. One of the key issues for getting Brexit done was to control the borders and to control migration. If this visibly cannot be seen to be done so openly and patently with people landing on the shores every day, it's a really bad look for the government.
Well, let's look at another of those headaches for the Prime Minister on the front of The Observer, Christina, and social care plans.
Yes, well, what has emerged this week after great flourishing announcements about social care was going to be done as well and sorted, a problem that has been hanging around for a very long time, is that levelling up now appears to be levelling down yet again, which is what generally happens in this country, because the social care policy that's been unveiled would penalise poorer pensioners much more than richer pensioners. They would pay a much higher proportion of their assets to contribute to their social care. So understandably, this is going down like a bucket of sick with Red Wall MPs who are already very, very fed up with the Prime Minister because, as Ali says, because of his handling of the Owen Patterson affair. And it's very interesting that people say things like Boris Johnson was badly advised over that. I mean, how do you really have to be advised that tearing up a rule book in the middle of a process is a bad idea? I mean, that stank. Everybody could see it stank. Boris Johnson couldn't see it stank because
he does now admit, doesn't he, that he made a big mistake?
Yeah, sure, because it's backfired. But is he sorry? No, he's just sorry that he was caught out. He's sorry that it's had ill consequences for him. And he's not a man who's used to dealing with consequences. He's a man who's used to tearing up the rule book wherever he goes and thinking it will all be fine. And now he's thought, oh dear, I've been caught out. And this is very, very inconvenient for me. And I'm afraid the social care thing is likely to backfire in a similar way, because people are not going to back this. And MPs now have got the taste of rebellion because, you know, they're not going to be automatically doing what they're told to do. So I think we could well be seeing yet another U-turn from this government of constant U-turns.
Ali, he's also been caught without a mask on a train on the front of the Sunday Mirror.
Yeah, it's just not helpful. I mean, the Prime Minister is his own worst enemy. Look, if anyone can lose the next election, and Boris is a politician that defies political gravity. He wears his political clothing very lightly. He's the Teflon politician, and he's a winner, which is why the Conservatives backed him, and they'll continue to back him while they think he's going to win. As soon as they don't think he's going to win, things will get very difficult for him. So he is the single person who can actually point his own gun towards his own foot and shoot himself in the foot ahead of the next election. And just little things like this. I mean, earlier this week, he went on a visit to a hospital where, again, He didn't wear a mask for part of the visit. Apparently not for very long, but still, why put oneself in that position to be ridiculed like this? Little things. And, a lot of people criticize Dominic Cummings for the way that he ran the Downing Street operation, but he did speak truth to power. He was very, very direct and tough with his boss. And the problem is, to Christina's point, I really do feel that in Downing Street right now, there seems to be a lack of key advisors that can actually tell the Prime Minister, if you do X, if you take X position, it's a very, very bad idea. It's going to backfire. And you're now in a position where, as Christina says, you've got a number of backbenchers that are very, very wary on this social care point. They're not going to just take a three-line whip and get told what to do. They're going to push back and say, look, hang on a second. We've had so many U-turns here. We've been embarrassed in front of our constituents over this whole climb down on second jobs. We're just not going to be lobby fodder anymore. We're going to push back. And that's very dangerous in terms of party management for a government.
OK, let's take a pause. Coming up after the break, could you be one of the many people experiencing HOGO as a result of the pandemic? You can find out what that means after the break. Welcome back. You're watching The Press Preview. With me are the columnist at the article, Ali Miraj, and journalist and author, Christina Patterson. Christina, the front of the Sunday Times now, and it has a story with the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, looking into one of the issues that has been much discussed during coronavirus and why ethnic minorities were disproportionately affected by the virus. What is he trying to find out?
Well, according to this story, it's less the overall issue of why death rates amongst Black and ethnic minority people were so shockingly high as compared to white Caucasian people. This is actually about medical equipment and whether there is bias in medical equipment, because apparently oximeters, which are very important in measuring oxygen levels for patients with COVID, are less accurate for Black people than they are for white people. Now, this is actually part, I think, of a much wider issue. I've done some, I wrote a report for an organisation called Alzheimer's Disease International a few years ago. And one of the things I learnt is that a lot of, most medical trials are done more on white people than BAME people for all kinds of reasons, because of the people who volunteer, the people who come forward. So it is a complex issue. And, clearly it's good that Sajid Javid is looking into this. But the much, much bigger issue is why 2 to 4 times as many Black and ethnic minority patients died than white people. And there are lots of reasons for that. But one is clearly that there are, many come from areas with high levels of deprivation, because essentially poorer people generally have paid the price for this pandemic, which has been tragic. So it is a complex issue. But I remember in the early days when the photos popped up of healthcare workers who had died, and the shock when you realised that they were nearly all brown, essentially. And one of the things that emerged at that point was that for some reason, healthcare workers, whether doctors, healthcare workers, nurses, or whoever, seemed to have less access to PPE than white healthcare workers. Now, that is an absolute scandal. And again, it's one of the things that needs to be looked into.
And on this specifically, Ali, these devices, people will recognise them. They go on the end of your finger and they measure oxygen levels in your blood. And the thinking is that because dark skin absorbs more light than white skin, they may not be so accurate. Is that right?
That's right. That's what's being reported in the paper. And I think Sajid Javid's right to investigate it further. I mean, clearly, if there are deficiencies in design which are not accurately giving you readings upon which various medical decisions are then made, there is a problem. So I do think it's right to look at it. And I think the Health Secretary should hopefully get to the bottom of what the issue is and try and resolve it.
Yeah, and devices that have been in use since the 1980s, in fact. Let's have a look at the Sunday Telegraph, Ali, with you then. And this is about the rollout of vaccinations to younger age group children and whether or not they should be rolled out to 5-year-olds.
Well, yes, this is a talk about whether we should be rolling out jabs to kids between the ages of 5 and 11. Not because they are particularly affected badly, adversely by coronavirus. I think there are literally a handful of fatalities amongst kids, thankfully, on the back of coronavirus, but more because they can act as vectors for the spread of infection. And at the moment, it's all about third booster jabs for adults and also trying to keep the transmission under control so that the NHS is not overwhelmed and the death rate remains low, which thankfully at the moment we seem to be managing and containing. So that's what it's around. I think the Royal College of Paediatricians is not convinced by this. It wants a lot more discussion around it. It wants a lot more evidence around it, because these decisions are very finely judged, and you do not want to be administering vaccines to kids where there really is not compelling evidence to suggest there are no negative effects in the long term, and there just simply isn't enough evidence yet. So I think this one's going to run for a little while longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar discussion to that we had before the decision to roll out the vaccines to the 12 to 15-year-old bracket as well, and coming as we start to see boosters opened up to the over 40s and second doses for 16 and 17-year-olds as of next week. Before we run out of time, Christina, let's go back to the Sunday Times. Do you suffer from HOGO?
What I suffer from, HOGO is the hassle of going out, which is where, for example, book restaurants and then don't turn up for them, or book theatre tickets even and don't turn up for them. I certainly don't do that. But what I suffer from, if I'm honest, is really, really intense nostalgia for my life as it was before the pandemic. I'm someone, most of my adult life, I've been out most nights. And I've now had, something like, whatever it is, I've lost track, like 500 nights of mostly sitting at home, which is not my idea of a great time. So I don't have a fear of the hassle of going out. What I do have is a fear of catching COVID, because, as we know, it's an airborne disease. And if you go to restaurants or theatres where obviously, people are not wearing masks in restaurants, and some people may be vaccinated, some may not, but even if you are vaccinated, it doesn't stop you getting or spreading the virus. So for the moment, I'm erring on the side of caution, but I'm really, really sick of erring on the side of caution. I would much rather be out, going to parties, dancing, doing whatever I used to do. But I have some sympathy for those who have got out of the habit and find that they just, have kind of lost that habit or muscle, as a psychologist who's interviewed for this piece has said.
I'm in awe of your stamina to have been out every night, Christina. Are you a fellow party animal, Ali?
I'm a party animal. I DJ a lot, but I've also been eating out a lot in restaurants. I took Rishi Sunak's instruction last year of eat out to help out really to heart, even though the government is no longer subsidizing my dinners, which is reflected in my waistline. So, no, I don't have any sort of hassle of going out issues. I much prefer going to restaurants than sitting at home watching Squid Games on Netflix. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I yearn to meet people, and I'm enjoying going out and about, going to the theatres and also going to art galleries and eating out and enjoying myself. So, yes, I don't have this issue.
Well, I suppose we should say a very big thank you then for staying in on your Saturday night to join us here on Sky News. We will see you again in the next hour.